Also, just by way of information, for some of you, you may have noticed, at 2 o'clock today in Lee, you might have to help me out on this one. B192, the former First Lady of Ukraine, B190, will be speaking on campus. This was a hastily arranged event overlapping with other events. So if you're interested in Ukraine, that's something you may want to check on the Kennedy Center website. At 4 o'clock today, we'll also be hosting another of our advisory board members, Michael Simpson, who runs the global coaching practice for Franklin Covey. He'll be speaking as part of our Practical Politics series here at 4. So lots of things going on today at the Kennedy Center. I hope that if you're not already following us on Facebook or Twitter, that you will do so. Our website is obviously the central place where you can find all the information that you need, but there are so many things that are happening, especially this time of the semester. We hope that you're able to connect with those things that are of most use and most interest to you. Well, we would like to present an award to Amini Kajunju, and I know our director, Jeff Ringer, is really sick that he is not here. He is in China today with our China teachers at their annual conference, and this really came about through a conversation that our director, Jeff Ringer, had with Amini in New York, with a discussion that was something around the lines of, we would like to have you come back to Provo, and is that a possibility? Well, that was a few years ago, and here we are today. We decided one way that we could introduce Amini and talk a little bit about her contributions as we see them would be through a filmed series. And so as part of our 30th anniversary at the Kennedy Center, which we're beginning to celebrate from now through the end of next year, we have identified 30 people who have been influenced by the Kennedy Center in various ways. Not all are alumni. Some have participated in study abroads or internships. Some were students who found their way to a student organization or an activity, or were influenced or mentored by a faculty member that was residing in the Kennedy Center. But through all of these different stories, we get kind of a sense of, over 30 years, what has happened and what have been some of the benefits to students and faculty and to those who have been engaged at the Kennedy Center. So without further ado, let me introduce Amini Kajunju.
New York was an important place for me to come because I could interact among Africans, I could interact among Asians, I could interact among anybody that I wanted, because this city is so international. We see ourselves as a convener of thought leaders, Africans and Americans coming together to find solutions for African problems. We're talking about 1 billion people here. You can't ignore 1 billion people. My name is Amini Kajunju, and I'm the president and CEO of the Africa America Institute.
All right, Amini, would you please join me here? So, on behalf of the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies, we'd like to present you with the International Service Award, signed by President Worthen and by Jeff Ringer. This is for steadfast humanitarian service and for exemplary endeavors in the promotion of Christian ideals among the peoples of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'd like to continue the conversation and start with Amini's experience with Africa that began obviously at BYU, but let's skip ahead. And after BYU, your experience with Africa began in New York. Tell us about how you got to New York and how New York has played a role in your experience with Africa.
First of all, I just want to say I'm so happy to be back on campus. I spent quite a bit of time in this room when I was a student here. particularly for Model United Nations, which Corey was a part of, and David Buckner. I don't know if you guys know him, but just very, very, very happy. It brings back wonderful, pleasant memories of my time here at BYU. When I graduated from BYU, I worked for a company called InsureQuote. It no longer exists, but you remember the company. It's out west of here. It was west of here, and I did that for 8 months. But my heart was always, I always wanted to build an international career, and I thought the best city for me to do that in was New York. For me, everything about New York attracted me. I love the fact that it's probably one of the most international cities in the United States. I love the fact that I could go to any restaurant from any cuisine that I wanted to. I love the fact that just about every nationality is represented in New York City. So I went to visit a friend of mine who graduated from BYU. She was from New Jersey. I went to see her on vacation. I came back from that vacation and told my boss, his name was Doug, I said, Doug, I'm quitting. I'm leaving in about a week. I have no job. I have no idea what I'm going to do in New York, but I'm going to put everything that I own in my car, and we'll just see what happens. And that's exactly how I left BYU, well, Salt Lake. So, Doug, my then boss, just looked at me like I was crazy. And of course, everybody was like, why would you move to New York? It's so crime-ridden. You may not live, somebody might kill you. I mean, I heard it all from everybody around me, but I was determined, I'm moving to New York. So I put everything that I owned in my car, and whatever didn't fit in my car didn't come with me. I had $300 in the bank account. And I had a car payment that I needed to make a month later, so I had to get a job. I had to figure out something. So I drove to New York, and the economy was very good back then. As soon as I got to New Jersey, where my friend lived at the time, I pulled out a New York Times, and I remember the employment section. We still, back then, it was use the newspaper to look for a job. And it was about this thick, and there were jobs galore. So within a week, I found a job. And and then of course, the history goes on from there. But
So in 2007, we met with you. You were working with a different group, with the Workshop in Business Opportunity. Talk a little bit about New York and working with African American business people and African entrepreneurs.
So for me, when I thought about my career over time, I thought that it needed to have a leadership element. I really wanted to be a decision maker in an institution. I wanted it to have an international scope, and I wanted it to have something to do with economic development. And I had been working at International Executive Service Corps as a program manager for an Africa-focused program in which I sent American volunteers to Africa to provide business development consulting to local businesses. And that was really a dream job in many ways, but I wasn't a decision maker. And so time went on, and I came across this job where I would run this nonprofit that helped develop local entrepreneurs. And I went for it. I applied for the job, and I got it. And I actually took over from the founder. The founder had ran the institution for 36 years. And here I came right after him. As you can imagine, that was a very challenging transition. And he thought I was going to destroy his baby. It's still around, it's still doing very well. But so when we talked that time, I was running this institution, and it was really exciting because New York, as you can imagine, has people from all walks of life, and of course all different social economic levels. And the mission of WEBO was to assist under-resourced entrepreneurs with training and education and access to information to help them build their businesses. And for me, that was exciting, A, because I would be a decision maker. I was the executive director. B, it would help me understand how businesses grow. And as we know, the backbone of the American economy are small businesses. And so that was exciting to be a part of that. And of course, I was working with mainly African American, Hispanic businesses, but also women-owned businesses. And we worked in some of the most challenging neighborhoods of New York. And so that was very fulfilling for me. And also we a month did not go by where we didn't get calls from people from other countries who wanted the program. And particularly if they knew that I was African, many people from African countries would call us and say, why don't you bring the Weibo program to this city or to this organization, because there are entrepreneurs here as well who need this training. I was there for 10 years and I had a lot to do. I never got the chance to bring Weibo outside of the United States, but we were able to bring Weibo to other parts of the United States, and that was exciting for me, yeah.
Let's talk about your current organization. There was a great little spot on CNN recently talking about upcoming African leaders, and they talk about you being the first African-born president and CEO of the African American Institute. Tell us what that means and how has your transition to this role taken place?
Yeah. So AAI, the African American Institute, is actually a pretty historic institution. It's been around for 61 years. And it was created by two African Americans, scholars, in 1953, who decided that there wasn't enough connection between Africans and African Americans in terms of education, in terms of just cultural exchanges. And they decided to create an organization that would make those things happen. And then over time, it grew into an institution that actually ended up giving 23,000 Africans scholarships to study in the United States. And in the middle of doing all of that, we did that for a good 45 years. We worked with over 430 American universities because that's where we were placing many of these students. Many of these individuals went on to become leaders on the continent. One of them, the president of Cote d'Ivoire, President Alassane Ouattara, we just gave him an award on September 22nd because we gave him a scholarship to get a PhD in economics in 1977. And he was so wonderful. His speech and his acceptance speech was so emotional because he was a young man, and America looked very different back then in 1977. And to come back to receive this award from us, and he's now 72 and is a president of a country, he was grateful and even said that he would give AAI some money, which is music to my ears. Because that's part of my job, is to go out there looking for money for AAI. And you may know the great Wangari Maathai. She was a Kenyan environmentalist who won a Nobel Peace Prize. She's passed away, but we gave her a scholarship in 1974. I could go on and on. There's so many individuals who've gone on to do great things. The head of the Mauritius Stock Exchange is someone who benefited from an AI scholarship. Practically a fourth of the Namibian leadership today, the prime minister, the ambassador, all receive scholarships from AAI. And just on that note, with the 20th anniversary of democracy in South Africa, AAI was a premier institution in providing scholarships to former ANC freedom fighters who would leave South Africa and have to go into other countries. They had to change their name, they had to take new passports, but they wanted to be educated. They really did. And AAI had a program in 1968 that provided scholarships to these individuals. So that just gives you a sense of the history of AAI. And, but in the 90s, we had to shift. The US government was a major donor of these programs, and the US government decided that it didn't want to give money to in this way anymore, much to our disappointment and much to many people's disappointment throughout Washington, D.C., because many felt like if the US was going to give money in foreign aid, this was one of the best ways to spend your tax dollars. is to give education to another human being. I mean, if that has so much positive effect for years and years to come. And so many people in Washington were disappointed when these programs were no longer being supported. Today, AAI is a different institution. I joined AAI 2 years ago. I took over from an individual that had been there for 16 years. Indeed, I'm the first African-born leader of AAI. Prior to me, there were mainly, to be perfectly honest, white males. And the last two were two black women, but that were African Americans. And so I'm the first to have been born in Africa to lead the institution. But up to about 1990, from 53 to 1990, AAI was run by white males. And so that gives you a bit of the history. And today, we are focused on education. We are focused on capacity building, but we're taking a different slant to it. I've recently, this is, you guys are hearing it first, but we're going to launch a major AAI Legacy Scholarship Fund. And the fund will raise money to give African students an opportunity to study in African institutions. Because it's becoming very evident that African educational institutions need to be strengthened. Harvard doesn't need another $1 million from AAI so that they can take on African students to study there. Of course, many people in Africa want to study at Harvard. They want to study at BYU. They want to study all these places, but we have to strengthen the institutions locally. So we're going to try to raise money from American institutions, American companies that are doing extremely well in Africa, whether it be Procter & Gamble, GE, who we just gave an award to. GE is doing extremely well on the continent. They're making a lot of money. They're making a lot of impact, but they're making a lot of money. Coca-Cola has been in Africa for 130 years. So we're going after these companies and we're asking them to give a little bit of their corporate responsibility dollars to AAI so we can turn back around and give scholarships to Africans to study within African institutions. Because one of our mission is to increase the capacity of African educational institutions, particularly higher education.
So before we transition and talk about Africa, I'm just curious to know from the audience, how many of you have studied in Africa? How many of you speak French, Portuguese, other African languages?
Swahili? Yay!
How many of you are from Africa?
Yeah.
All right.
Hi.
So let's talk a little bit about Africa. The headlines we all know. We see that over and over and over. But what's the story about Africa that you would tell?
Yeah, I mean, it's so complex, right? But I think if I were to break it down to a few points, one, and this is to me it's obvious, but it needs to be said. The people of Africa are just the same as anyone else. And I know that sounds like, well, duh, yeah, of course. But I think it's worth saying because I've lived in America long enough to know the stereotypes. When I first came to the United States, people would tell me things like, oh, the clothes that you have on, you didn't buy those in Africa because there aren't any clothes in Africa. People walk around naked. Now you might think, oh, those are just silly people who don't. YALI, the Young African Leadership Initiative that President Obama just recently created, he invited 500 individuals, African students, to come to the United States, and they were here for about 6 weeks. And about 50 of them were at the University of Arizona doing some training. And one of my friends, a colleague of mine who ended up using as an intern at AAI, said that the mayor of a certain city, I won't say the name because I don't want to embarrass the person, asked her this question and said, you were given clothing when you came to the United States. I'm so happy that we were able to do that for you. That was one. The second thing, the same mayor of this city, whose name I won't mention, said, so what province of Africa do most of you come from? And so a very funny, wonderful young lady said, I'm from the province of South Africa. So, couple of things. Africans every day, they're waking up every morning, sending their kids to school, trying to get a job, trying to get married, have babies, build a career, and they care about the environment, they care about world peace, so they're just like everybody else. So that's one. Second, many Africans are tired of having to give Americans geography lessons. Are we not? Yes? Those of you who are here, I just have to say this. Please look at the map. For a very long time before moving to New York, I used to say, hi, I'm from Zaire and it's in Central Africa. I mean, that was sort of the title. I had to say it's in Central Africa because people would say, where is that? Where is Zaire? And it's like one of the biggest countries in Africa. It's right there in the middle. It's no longer called Zaire. It's now Democratic Republic of Congo. There it is. So when I lived in Utah, when I lived in Colorado, I had to say that every single time. And it was so frustrating. And that's true for any African that's here. The other thing is that Ebola is only in 3 African countries. How many countries are there in Africa? 54. 54. Yes. So the other challenge that many Africans have is that when something is happening in one region of the continent, it's attributed to the whole continent. And people look at Africa as a country, right? There's even a website, Africa is a Country. You should look it up. It's a great website. It has a lot. No, really, it has a lot of wonderful information about the continent, economic, politics, the whole thing. But it's that joke that among us Africans, we get so tired of it because many people see the African continent as a country. So Ebola unfortunately is affecting 3 countries too many. But it's really 3 countries. And so when a Ghanaian student in China gets attacked because these folks think that he has Ebola simply because he's African, and maybe they think because he comes from a West African country, it's heartbreaking to us because it says, you don't understand who we are, you don't understand the continent and how it is and what's happening within it and all the countries and all the different pluses and minuses that are within the continent. The Africa is Rising story, I think, is true, but we have challenges. There are many, many challenges on the continent. But with those challenges, there are still people who are working very hard to build businesses, to build governments that are accountable to their people, to improve African institutions. And different countries are at different stages of this rising story. Some countries are doing better than others. My country is actually not doing great. We are struggling at every level possible, politically, economically. And even though we should be one of the richest countries in the world, we have everything that is required for industrial sort of production. Name it, we have it. Every mineral you can think of, they just recently discovered oil in Congo. I mean, it's an incredible piece of land. And yet, for reasons that we could spend all day talking about, we're not able to harness those resources into something good. What else can I say? And another thing, when you think about going on vacation, consider the continent. There are so many beautiful places on that continent. Whether it's Kenya, whether it's Mozambique, whether it's Senegal, where my husband is from, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Cairo. I mean, it's just filled with beautiful landscape, animals, culture, cuisine, that really the world should come and see and experience.
So one of the things that we've noticed, and a few years ago we held a conference on the future of Africa, kind of focusing on how Africa's rising, looking at the arts, history, film, literature, all of those things that we're interested in studying. And yet Ebola and child soldiers and blood diamonds make the headlines. I'm sure right now, as you mentioned with Ebola, this kind of crowds out all of the other stories. But I'm interested a little bit more about that. How you address those kinds of issues at AEI, what you see as maybe corporate priorities or government priorities, or also what you see from African leaders, their priorities.
Yeah, so at the African American Institute, we have 3 missions. One is to increase the capacity of African nationals. Second is to increase the capacity of African institutions. And third is to serve as a convener of thought leaders who care about the continent, whether they be American or Africans. And we've held, on that last piece, we're trying to do exactly that, convene thought leaders on issues that are important to the continent and really think about and talk about solutions. So for example, we recently had a convening on power. The Obama administration is going to invest about $9 billion in the power sector on the continent. It's really a drop in the bucket, but he's hoping that that $9 billion will then invite the $40 billion that's required per year to make sure that that whole continent has as much electricity as Las Vegas. Well, so that maybe not that much, but so that everybody has electricity and that there's enough electricity for industrial production, for businesses, for schools, for hospitals, for the modern world, really. So that's important. We recently did a convening on remittances. There's my daughter. On remittances and really looking at how Africans are sending billions of dollars back home. I think the numbers of late are $60 billion get sent through Western Union, through formal and informal means, putting the money in the suitcase and just sending it to grandma. Africans in the diaspora are sending $60 billion worth of funds to Africa for day-to-day necessities and to help people, their families start businesses, to pay for school fees, etc. And that's actually much less than the foreign aid that most governments give to the African continent. So those of us in the diaspora are fueling even some of this Africa is Rising story. And then when you look at the arts, you've heard of Nollywood, yes? So there's Bollywood, there's Hollywood, and then there's Nollywood. I don't know what the stats are, but I think I recently read that it's Bollywood first, then Nollywood, then Hollywood in terms of film production. Can you believe that? Nigerians are producing movies every single day, and Nigerians and other Africans are soaking it up, and I mean, you can go to just about any African household and you're most likely going to find Nigerian movies being played. It's such a popular form of entertainment. And there's a company named Iroko, which is actually trying to be the Netflix of African movies. So they've taken that model and they're using it to provide African movies, not just Nigerian, but other movies as well, to the African audience. So these kinds of interesting innovations are coming up. And of course, culturally, as Africans, we've always known that we're very strong there as well. And now the world is slowly but surely discovering it. I mean, when you look at our clothing, for example, this outfit was made in Senegal. And when you look at how famous designers are copying, some of the fashions that they're seeing in African streets, it's interesting, but it also tells us that Africans need to really get up and start creating these outfits and sending it to the world so that the world can see what we can produce in terms of fashion. And of course, music, that's always been the case. People have always known about that. But oops, sorry.
Well, there's a lot more we could talk about. We're running out of time, and I want to leave some time for questions. So you can stand where you are, stand up, tell us your name and what you're studying, and ask your question. I'll have to restate it for our audience, but I'd just like to take the last 10 minutes we have. Any questions that you have for Amini? Please stand.
You mentioned the difficulty between sending students to American universities and European universities versus African. Could you talk a little bit about that? What do you think is best? What do you think should be the balance there?
Yeah.
What are kind of your thoughts on educating students in Africa and abroad?
So, no, good question. And it's an ongoing issue, isn't it? Because, first of all, the American higher education system is the envy of the world. Primary, secondary education, America could do better. But universities, everybody wants to come here, whether you're African or Japanese. My colleague at work, she's Japanese, and she wanted to come to the United States to get her education. So it's true all over the world, and it's true in Africa as well. Everybody's dreaming to come to America to study. That's just everybody's dream. And that's fine, and I think if you have the capacity to do so, you should do so. But for me, and I think for many other people, we're starting to see that this issue of brain drain, and now people are putting a positive spin to it, brain circulation, is real. So brain circulation, I come, I study, then I go back home, maybe I come back. I'm a global citizen, I'm moving around. There's lots of those. Many of those people are my friends. But the fact still remains that African higher education institutions are lagging very far behind. And for those people who cannot come to the United States to study and must study in those institutions, what are we doing for them? And so for me, it's becoming not only my professional calling, but even my personal calling to really see if I can make a contribution in increasing the capacity of African institutions. Because when that happens, then research that is locally focused and can help sort of solve some of the local problems can happen. The beauty of a university is its ability to disseminate information and to also sort of give people the ability to think critically. And if we don't give the young of Africa that opportunity to do it locally, if they have to travel all the way to Utah, all the way to Arizona to do so, then we've put an unnecessary burden on them. And also we're not building the local capacity, and that's very important. So for me, if you have the money to afford to come to the United States and you're an African, go ahead and do so. But for the rest that can't afford to come here, we have to give them something that is equally competitive and top-notch locally so that they can compete with everyone else that's traveling all over the world to get an education. My father, got his bachelor's at University of Louvain. That's what it was called back then. It's now University of Kinshasa. It was one of the top-notch universities on the continent. It has since fallen on bad times. And when he received a scholarship from the Japanese government to get an MBA in Osaka University, he was one of the first in the 70s to do so. And then the reason we came to the United States for him to get a PhD in economics at the University of Colorado Boulder. So we've always left the continent to get that higher degree, but I think it's high time for some of us to stay home and make that happen at home.
Please.
My name's Easton. I'm a history major, but I lived in West Africa for a while.
Which country?
Sierra Leone, one of our Ebola countries.
Yes.
So your focus of your organization is to focus on empowering those institutions in Africa, and you do that through money, right? You're giving them money or training?
Money, training, students that they need to, students that they need to teach so that they can, so we can sort of evaluate how well they teach and the sort of the end result of that, yes.
Okay, great. My question is, Africa in general, especially the country I live in, suffers a lot from corruption. How are you dealing with those issues when you're giving large sums of money to these institutions?
Oh, the C word. Corruption. Again, that's another 24-hour conversation that we could have. But I'll stay focused. We have not experienced corruption where we've worked. The institutions that we work with are high-level institutions with administrators and faculty that get paid well and that are organized and don't need to take money under the table for anything. So that's one. And so when we do the due diligence on the institutions that we want to work for, this is obviously one of the things that we look at. So we've never had that problem. So Pan Atlantic University, we received $2.5 million from Coca-Cola Africa Foundation, and most of that money was spent on the continent. And it was spent properly. So not a problem there. I think where you can run into some problems are some of the state universities. It's universities that are run by the government. They're highly under-resourced. Teachers barely get paid. You barely have chalk in the classroom. I mean, it's really sad what you see at some of the state-run institutions. So, and just to touch on corruption, where does corruption come from? When you see corruption at the sort of basic level, it usually comes from the fact that the person that may be asking for that extra hand is not being compensated very well, and or hasn't been paid in 6 months, and they have a family to take care of. So a lot of this stuff is structural. It's not moral. It's just surviving an environment that's very, very difficult. But then the corruption that happens at a higher level with the multinationals, who instead of following the law of the land, they rather give a minister, $50,000, so I don't have to pay this tax, or don't make me have to sign this. And so that's the other part of corruption that people don't talk about. We typically talk about corruption being endemic to the African continent, but we don't talk about the institutions and companies that bring that temptation to bear. So frankly, for me, we're going to solve most of the corruption problem by increasing the capacity of institutions. Once we do that, the need for corruption will go down.
Yes, please.
My name is Marissa, and I lived in Central Africa for a while, very close to the DRC. I was in Zambia. And I think a lot of us, we care a lot about Africa, and maybe we felt a draw towards it like our whole lives. What role can we play as Americans? We maybe we're not Africa. We can't build our capabilities to build up the continent, perhaps. But so, what role do you see us as Americans who care about Africa playing in helping Africa rise?
That's a really good question. I actually recently did a workshop on philanthropy in Africa, and I was looking at how non-Africans give to the continent and how Africans give to the continent. And I actually used a Harvard case study on the Oprah School in South Africa. I don't know if you guys have heard of the school that she built several years ago. And Harvard did a case study on her school, the good, the bad, the ugly of the Oprah School in South Africa. So to sort of answer your question about what can non-Africans do on the continent. And if I can just extend your question, can harm be done in your attempt to do good? And the answer to that is yes. The Oprah School is, Oprah, I've never met her, but she's probably a fantastic human being. And when she met Nelson Mandela, she asked Nelson, what can I do to be of service on the continent? And Nelson told her, education. Education is at the core of our challenges, and if anything you can do in education, it'd be fantastic. So she decided to create an all-girls high school, and she went about to do that. She spent $40 million to build a school that initially took in only 152 students. You do the math. So this case study then sort of looked at the pluses of that. So the plus is obviously her idea of starting a school. That's always a good thing. The minus is, did we need to spend $40 million to enroll 150 students? I think she now has about 450 students at this school. And they were talking about the lack of sort of community involvement. They were talking about the impositions that she made within the community for the school to look and feel however she thought was best. And in her mind, she had a very challenging upbringing. And she's taking these students who are poor as well, and in her mind, creating an environment of luxury and elegance and seats that are made of, velvet and, 1,000 count sheets, for sleeping. That's going to inspire these 450 girls to be good in the world and to do good in the world. Many people would disagree. Maybe people would say she could have built 40 schools, $1 million each, and still have an opulent school and affect more people. I just bring that up to say that if you have a love for the continent and you want to make an impact, couple of things. One is connect with another African and learn from that African or a group of Africans about how you can make an impact. I really don't think that it's right for an individual to go on the continent and try to make a change and do it alone, because you're going to have blind spots. There's a lot of things that you're not going to know. You're going to look at a problem and you're going to look at someone and say, oh, they're starving. Let me solve their problem. They need more food. That may not be what they really need. That may be the sort of obvious thing, but if you got to dig deeper, you got to get to know that person a little bit better. You got to get to know the issue a little bit better before you make that intervention. And I wouldn't do it by myself. I would do it with somebody else. Unless you're an American that's lived in Africa for 30, 40 years, you're sort of part of the fiber of the culture, then maybe you can do it alone. But if you live in Utah or Arizona or New York, and you fly to Kenya and identify a problem and decide that you want to do something about it, your intentions are going to be good, but you may actually do harm, or you may not even make the impact that you really want to make because you have so many blind spots. So partner with an African, learn as much about the issue as you can locally, visit, go there. I had someone come into my office and said that they wanted to enter the mining industry. I don't know why they came to me for that. But anyway, and they had never set foot on the continent. And this happens all the time. People think that the problems on the continent are so simple. There's nothing complex about it. The kid is starving, give it some food. No, it's actually more complex than that. And so your job is to find out how complex it is and if you can play a role in solving the problem.
Well, we're out of time, but for those of you who are interested, we have another presentation this afternoon, I believe at 3 o'clock in the Education in Zion Auditorium. Amini will be talking specifically about how to make Africa the focus of your career. So I know we have a lot of you who are African Studies minors, some of you international development minors. There's a whole range of opportunities. We'd encourage you to join us at 3 o'clock today, and we'll be exploring these issues in greater depth. Please join me in thanking Amini Kajunju.